Welcome, everyone. We'll be getting started in just a few moments. Welcome, everyone. We'll be getting started in just a few moments. Welcome, everyone. We'll be getting started in just a few moments. Okay, welcome and thank you for being here as we observe Yom HaShoah, Holocaust Remembrance Day. And I just want to dedicate this to my grandfather, Lavoslav Kordichan. And we are grateful to Cantor Evelyn Gould for leading our commemorative service this evening. And following the service at about 7:30 p.m., we're honored to welcome Faris Cassell speaking about her new book, The Unanswered Letter, One Holocaust Family's Desperate Plea for Help. If you need technical assistance tonight, please type it into the YouTube chat. And now I'm going to turn it over to Cantor Evelyn Gould.
Mizmor David, Adonai roi lochsa, Bihinot Sheyar B'tzeini, Al mei menuchot yenach aleini, Nafshi yishavev, Nafshi yishavev, Yanecheni b'magelei tzedek, L'man shemo, Gam ki eleich begeitz al mavet, Lo irara, ki ata imadi, Shivtecha umi shantecha, Shivta umi shantecha, Hema yenachamuni, Ta'aroch lefanai shulchan, Ta'aroch lefanai shulchan, Ta'aroch lefanai shulchan, Neged tzarei, Deshanta Vashemen Roshi, Deshantara Shemen Roshi, Deshanta Vashemen Roshi, Kusiruvaya, Ach Tov, Ach Tov v'chesed, Yirdifuni, Kol yemei chayai, V'shavti beveit Adonai, V'shavti beveit Adonai, le'orech yamim. Tonight we are here to remember. We've just finished our Pesach Sedarim, at which we read, "You shall explain on that day, it is because I myself went forth from Egypt." And this requires that in every generation, each of us must feel as though we ourselves had engaged in the struggle against Egypt and gone forth from her borders. Just as we were slaves together in Egypt, so too we were together as Jews in the final solution. We were men, women, children, old and young. We were rabbis, teachers, farmers, townspeople, physicians, musicians, writers, school children, cantors, artists. We were pious, free-thinking, Bundist, labor Zionist, Hasidic, Reform. Some of us didn't even consider ourselves Jews. After all, we were Germans, Poles, Latvians, Austrians, Russians, Dutch, French, Italian, Czechs. But in the end, we were all there together. In Auschwitz, Buchenwald, Dachau, Treblinka, in the ghettos of Warsaw, Vilna, Lodz, in the pits dug in forests at Babi Yar and Ponarim. Each of us here today was also there, and we remember. Let's rise now as you're able, if you would like, for the Baruch Hu, the call to worship. Baruch Hu et Adonai HaMevorach. Baruch Adonai HaMevorach le'olam va'ed. Baruch Adonai HaMevorach le'olam va'ed. With this candle, we honor all who died during the Holocaust. With this candle, we honor the generation that did not have a chance to survive. With this candle, we honor the righteous Gentiles whose humanity triumphed over their fear. With this candle, we honor partisans and resistance fighters who fought both spiritually and physically, as well as those who could not fight. With this candle, we honor those who survived and their mandate to remind us that we must never forget. Finally, we light the sixth candle in honor of future generations with the hope that the horrors never, ever will be forgotten. חי וקיים תמיד ימלוך עלינו לעולם ועד. We bless the fountain of life, sovereign of all worlds, by whose word the evenings fall. Creator of the day and the night, who rolls back light before the dark and dark before the light, who makes day pass away and brings on the night, dividing between day and night. Baruch atah Adonai Hama'ariv Aravim. It was dangerous for us to meet at night, writes Rabbi Leo Beck. I shall never forget those meetings. We would assemble in darkness. To light a candle there, or even a match, would have brought immediate disaster upon us. We spoke about matters of the spirit and eternal questions, about God, about Jews in the world, about the eternity of the people Israel. In the midst of darkness, I sensed the light in the unlit room, the light of Torah. More than once, I could not see their faces, but I did see great spiritual light. ואהבתך לא תסור ממנו לעולמים. Dear God, please don't deny us your love. Baruch atah Adonai ohev amo Israel. And join me, please, in the Shema. Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. Baruch Shem Kevod Malchuto Leolam Va'ed. And you shall love the eternal your God with all your heart, with all your soul and all your might. And these words which I command you today shall be engraved on your heart. You shall teach them diligently to your children. You shall bind them as a sign upon your hand, and they shall be as frontlets between your eyes. You shall write them on the doorposts of your house and upon your gates. And by Primo Levi, a different Shema. You who live safe in your warm houses, you who find returning in the evening hot food and friendly faces, consider if this is a man who works in the mud, who does not know peace, who fights for a scrap of bread, who dies because of a yes or a no. Consider if this is a woman, without hair and without name, with no more strength to remember, her eyes empty and her womb cold, like a frog in winter. Meditate that this came about. I commend these words to you. Carve them in your hearts, at home, in the street, going to bed and rising. Repeat them to your children. Or may your houses fall apart. May illness impede you. May your children turn their faces from you. Kol ha'olam kulo gesher tzar me'od, gesher tzar me'od, gesher tzar me'od. Kol ha'olam kulo gesher tzar me'od, gesher tzar me'od. והעיקר, והעיקר, לא לפחד, לא לפחד כלל, והעיקר, והעיקר, לא לפחד כלל. All of this world is a very narrow bridge, a very narrow bridge, a very narrow bridge. All of this world is a very narrow bridge, a very narrow bridge. And the essence is not to fear, not to fear at all. The essence is not to fear at all. There was one non-Jewish peasant woman. I do not know her name. I do not know her face. But she helped my mother save 2 children. There, inside the work camp. There, inside the wire fence. On that day, my mother could not bribe. On that day, she had no choice. If she left us in the barracks, they would take us away. And she had to go to work. No choice. She handed her children through the fence to one peasant woman. My sister and I are here. That means the peasant lady kept us for whatever length of time, and then she returned us to our mother. We bless the Ancient One of Life, the God of all who have come before us, protector of Abraham and the help of Sarah. Let's take a minute now of silence to honor our ancestors, reaching all the way back to Abraham and Sarah. We rise now, if you are able, as you are able, for El Malay. El Malay Rachamim Shechein B'Maromim Hamitzei Menucha Nechona Tachat כנפי השכינה במעלות קדושים וטהורים כזוהר הרקיע מזהירים לנשמות כל אלה שחזיקנו היום לברכה שחלכו לעולמם בגן עדן תהי מנוחתם אנא בעל הרחמים הסתירים בסתר כנפיך לעולמים וצרור בצרור החיים את נשמותיהם אדוני הוא נחלתם ויענו בשלום משכבותיהם ונאמר Amen. It is up to us to offer praises to the source of all, to declare the greatness of the author of creation, who gave to us teachings of truth and planted eternal life within us. As it is written in the Torah, the Eternal One reigns now and forever. Actually, I'll call on Bernie Mangan and we will recite the Mourner's Kaddish together. Let me share my screen. Let us recite this together. Yitgadal, Auschwitz, V'yitkadash, Lodz, Shemei Rabbah, Ponar, Be'alma Divra Chirutei, Babiyar, V'yamalich Malchutei, Maidenek, Bechayichon v'yomechon, Birkenau, Uvechayi dechol Beit Yisrael, Kovno, Ba'agala u'vizman kariv, Yanoska, Ve'imru, Amen. Yehei Shemei Rabbah Mevorach, Leolam u'lalmei, Amaya. Yitbarach v'yishtabach Theresienstadt. V'yitpa'ar v'yitromam Buchenwald. V'yitnaseh v'yitadar Treblinka. V'yitale v'yithalal Vilna. Shemay Dekudesha Bergen-Belsen Berichu Mauthausen. Lo'ela min kol birchata v'shirata Dachau. Tushbechata v'nechemata Minsk. Damiran bi'alma Warsaw. V'imeru. Amen. Yehei shalom rabba min shemaya v'chayim aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael v'imru. Amen. Ose shalom b'mromav hu ya'aseh shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael ve'al kol yoshvei tevel v'imru. Amen. May the one who creates harmony above make peace for us and for all Israel and for all who dwell on earth. And let us say, Amen. We frequently encounter the attitude, writes Judy Chicago in The Holocaust Project, we encounter the attitude even among our Jewish friends that the Jews were willing victims. But that is not at all the story that is presented by the survivors themselves. Instead, they described many forms of resistance, from small gestures that were death-defying, in that if they were caught, they'd be shot, to active fighting in the ghettos. So let's close the service with this. Never say that you now go on your last way, though darkened skies may now conceal the blue of day, because the hour for which we've hungered is so near. Beneath our feet the earth shall thunder, we are here, because the hour for which we've hungered is so near. Beneath our feet the earth shall thunder, we are here. From land of palm tree to the far-off land of snow, we shall be coming with our torment, with our woe. And everywhere our blood has sunk into the earth, shall our bravery, our vigor blossom forth. And everywhere our blood has sunk into the earth, shall our bravery, our vigor blossom forth. We'll have the morning sun to set our day aglow. Our evil yesterdays shall vanish with the foe. But if the time is long before the sun appears, then let this song go like a signal through the years. But if the time is long before the sun appears, then let this song go like a signal through the years. This song was written with our blood and not with lead. It's not a song that summer birds sing overhead. It was a people midst the burning barricades that sang this song of ours with pistols and grenades. It was a people midst the burning barricades that sang this song of ours with pistols and grenades. So never say that you now go on your last way, though darkened skies may now conceal the blue of day, because the hour for which we've hungered is so near. Beneath our feet the earth shall thunder, we are here, because the hour for which we've hungered is so near. Beneath our feet the earth shall thunder, we are here. Thank you.
Thank you, Cantor Evelyn Gould, for leading us so beautifully this evening. So now we're going to switch gears a bit, and it's my great pleasure to introduce Faris Cassell, who will be speaking about her book, The Unanswered Letter, One Holocaust Family's Desperate Plea for Help. The book was recently awarded a National Jewish Book Award, so congratulations to Faris, quite an honor. Faris Cassell is a journalist and writer. She and her husband, Sydney, live in Eugene and are longtime members of TBI. She earned a BA in history from Mount Holyoke College and an MS in journalism from the University of Oregon. Her decades of research into Alfred and Hedwig Berger's story were supported by a Mount Holyoke Alumni Scholarship and by the generous cooperation of the Berger family. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing their name correctly, but I'm sure she'll let us know. And I wanted to let you all know that there will be time for Q&A following the presentation. And because of how we have our tech set up tonight, I invite you to type those questions into the chat, and I will be sharing them with Faris when we get to that point in the presentation. And I also want to let you know that the book is available from local bookstores. Of course, it is also available on Amazon and Barnes and Noble, etc. But Faris encourages you to get it locally if you can. And so now I am going to just take a moment and turn it over to Faris and set up our presentation.
There, is it set? Hi, thank you so much for having me come and talk with you tonight on this day of deep remembrance. An important time to reflect on what the Holocaust means to us today. So many different things. So, Nina, do you want to put up the pictures? So, as Nina says, my book is called The Unanswered Letter, One Holocaust Family's Desperate Plea for Help. It derived from a letter written by a desperate Jewish Viennese man, Alfred Berger, to strangers in America in 1939. Next slide. And the letter came into my life, next slide, when my husband brought it home from his office one day. It was an ordinary kind of a day. He came into the house. I was cooking dinner. The kids were underfoot. And he said, I have something I think you really will want to see. So I put down everything I was doing and took the letter in my hands. An elderly patient had given it to him that day and told him she thought that he would know better than she did what to do with it. So I asked my husband, why would she think that? He just laughed and said, I'm probably the only Jew that she knows. So I took the letter in my hand and began to read. It was written by Alfred Berger from Vienna, Germany, August 1939, which was shortly before World War II would break out in Europe. Dear Madam, the letter begins, You are surely informed about the situation of all Jews in Central Europe. This letter will not astonish you. So the letter certainly would have astonished as an American receiving a letter from Europe during these unsettled and tense times. But it would not have surprised Americans to hear that Jews were desperate at this time. Kristallnacht had happened almost a year before this letter was written, and news about Kristallnacht, that deadly pogrom that raged across the German Reich, news blazed across the headlines of American newspapers all across the country. People were aware that Jews were desperate and trying to escape the Nazis. So Alfred Berger goes on, by pure chance I got your address. My daughter and her husband will go in the next future to America, but an aunt of my son-in-law has given them, will sponsor them. She unfortunately is unable to sponsor us also. So Alfred goes on to beg a stranger to sponsor him and his wife Hedwig as immigrants to America. This may resonate with us today, may ring familiar in our ears as we think about the people knocking on our doors today. Alfred Berger goes on to say that a stranger would have no trouble with him and his wife. They just need a sponsor to escape the Nazi terror. He ends his letter, I beg you once more, help us to follow our children. It is our last and only hope. So here I am in my comfortable home, reading this letter and thinking about my own life. Questions just seemed to fly off of this letter for me. I wondered if the American Bergers did help these desperate Jews. I wondered if Alfred and Hedwig Berger were able to immigrant, and I wondered, even if they weren't allowed to immigrant, did they survive? One thing I did know amidst all of these questions, Sidney, my husband, is Jewish. Many of you may know him. But I was raised Christian. Yet if we and our family had lived in Vienna in those days, we too would be running for our lives. So I had a journalistic curiosity about the letters. I thought perhaps it would be a very interesting, moving story to find out, was the letter answered? And in addition to that, besides my curiosity, I felt moved by the letter despite the passage of time. I felt holding this thin, brittle sheet of airmail paper with handwriting. It was signed by Alfred Berger and held by only a few people before me. I felt like I was connected, like I was holding a life in my hands. Next, please. So the second page is called a personal statement, and it shows that Alfred, when he was writing this letter, was about 62 years old. He calls himself a merchant man. His wife Hedwig was younger. She was 50, and she was described as good at household works and a good seamstress and dressmaker. So he's painting a picture of a hardworking couple who only need the door opened so they can escape the Nazis. Next, please. The letter had been saved by this family for over half a century before it came into our lives. Next, please. Saved in a trunk. I began to research this letter. I was curious, and beyond that, I was touched by this letter and wanted to know more about the family. So I began sleuthing and contacting archives in really across America and in Europe. I learned that Alfred and Hedwig Berger, his daughter, Martha, here she is, was probably 26, and her husband was Leo Sizes. So I learned their last name from my investigations, which helped me to trace them. Also, what I learned was Alfred and Hedwig Berger had a second daughter, which hadn't been mentioned in the letter, Gretel. And I found that she was also, she was 18 at the time the letter was written. And she also needed to find a way to escape. Next, please. I began my research by searching for, again, after the few basic facts I could find, I began searching for possible descendants of Alfred and Hedwig. I found a granddaughter, Celia Sizes, in New York. I found grandchildren in Israel, Judith and Micha. And I found a first cousin, the grandson of Alfred's brother, Herman, who, and Peter, this great nephew, lived in Massachusetts. All of these American descendants had saved records, and especially Peter had saved family records that went back into the 1800s. Peter's grandfather Herman had been able to escape early on after the German occupation because his wife had family in America who actually ran an import business. So he brought with him crates of family records and belongings. Next, please. I traveled across the country several times searching for records and ended up partly in the Vienna room, as Peter called it. He built a room onto his house to preserve his family's heritage. And I spent days there going through the boxes and looking for records that might apply to Herman's brother Alfred. Next, please. It was here in the Vienna room that I found the first picture I would have of Alfred Berger. He's in the back row with his hand on his brother's shoulder. I think this is a fine picture. I love to see them in their clothes of probably about 1890. Alfred, to me, looks so earnest, so looking into the future with hope. Next, please. Here's Alfred again, older, and his wife, Hedwig. This is probably an engagement photo. I love this picture of Hedwig, who seems to have sort of a Mona Lisa look to her. You can't tell smiling or what's going on behind that beautiful mask, really. Alfred, you will notice his glasses seem a bit bigger than they were in the previous picture. Alfred, in fact, had a degenerative eye condition, and by the time he would write the letter to America, he'd become legally blind. Next, please. The family is growing. Here is Martha on the left and baby Gretel on the right. They're two daughters that we've been talking about. Next picture. The family continues to grow. Here they are, a typical Viennese young family out for a walk in the Vienna woods. There's Martha and Alfred, Gretel and Hedwig left to right. This is all pre-Anschluss, pre-occupation. when Jews thought that they were like any other citizens, and in fact contributed greatly to the Vienna society and were much appreciated by most Viennese. Next, please. When I first read that letter that Alfred Berger wrote, somehow I pictured Alfred and Hedwig as alone fighting against the Nazis and isolated. But in fact, they had a large extended family. Here is Hedwig on the left, second row down from the top. Alfred on the far right with his arm around one of his nieces. You can see his glasses there, identifying him right away. His daughter Martha, who is probably about 19, she has become a student of the piano. In the front are the two youngest cousins with their arms flung around each other, their caps pulled down over their eyes, the only ones with coats. Gretel is on the left and her cousin Ernst is on the right. I just think this is a very fun picture to see. Those two young people look like they're ready for an adventure. Next, please. And an adventure is what they would have, in fact. So if you can keep a picture of those two in your mind, you will hear more about them in a minute. This is a picture as the family continues to grow older. Gretel on the left, a young teenager. Martha on the right, and as a young married, and her husband Leo. You see their grand piano for Martha and Leo is drawing, painting. He was an artist as well as very resourceful salesman of leather goods. So this is him in their living room, which was also his studio. Next, please. This rather innocuous looking piece of paper actually holds a very dramatic family story. This is Ernst Berger, the young nephew we saw a couple pictures ago. This is his military record. When he came of age 18 in Vienna, the Germans were threatening an invasion, and the Nazis within the country were rising up and becoming threatening themselves. Young Jews were deciding how to react. Some were thinking of what practical jobs they might have when they might have to flee. But Ernst decided to join the Austrian army. He became a sniper. His unit was sent first to the German border, where Germany was massing its troops. But when the Austrian president surrendered their country without a shot being fired, the Austrian army pulled back to Vienna. So they ran ahead of the Nazis, and instead of being charged with defending their country from the Nazis, they were then charged with protecting the Nazis as they entered into Vienna. Ernst's unit was stationed in a building overlooking Hitler's triumphal parade route into Vienna. He told his family later that when Hitler's car, his open car, came underneath the window where he was stationed, the Austrian officers in the room with him left the room, knowing he was Jewish. And as he believed, they hoped that he would solve their problem of having to then serve Hitler, who had been their enemy. So Ernst had Hitler in his crosshairs and debated what to do. And as we know, of course, that he did not pull the trigger, he feared the repercussions for the Jews if a Jewish person was found to have assassinated Hitler. If only he could have seen a little bit into the future, perhaps the future would have been completely different. Next, please. This is Alfred and Hedwig Berger and their children with Martha's husband, Leo. Probably just a few days before the family would start to disperse and each one find their separate path of trying to escape the Holocaust. You can see the expressions on their face have gone from hopeful and proud and looking forward into the future from strained and trying to look happy and pleasant for this photo. You'll see that Alfred is not looking into the camera as the others are. That's because, again, of his eye issues. He was legally blind at this point. Next, please. This is Gretel on the left and Martha on the right. Just before the sisters would depart and not see each other again for 25 years. Gretel on the left was a young Zionist in Vienna and had gone and been very active in a Zionist youth group. Some Jewish organizations got together, hoodwinked, in fact, the Nazis into letting these young Zionists escape from Vienna. They organized train loads of these young people. So Gretel was on one of the first trains out of the country. Her departure was overseen in person by Alfred Eichmann, and her train took her from Vienna down to Athens, where these probably several hundred young people were loaded onto a chartered ship that the Jewish organizations had arranged for. It was actually, since no ordinary shipping lines would take this contraband cargo, it was Greek pirates who were bootlegging alcohol, who took these young people across the Mediterranean, evading British warships and fighter planes to bring their cargo safely to Palestine. The ship stopped, anchored way offshore, unloaded these young people who then swam to shore, their shoes tied around their neck, a backpack on their back, but they landed safely in Palestine. And that is where Gretel would find a husband and raise her family, and they live there today. Martha had her husband's family in America who were working to provide sponsorship for Martha. So she had a legal way to come to the country. She only had to wait for this visa to be called. America had a quota system, and so many Jews were flooding out of Austria and Germany that there was a long wait for Jews with legal papers for their turn to come to be admitted to America. So next, please. This is a picture of Leo, Martha's husband. He was actually an illegal Polish immigrant in Vienna. He had come as a young teenager across the border to escape anti-Semitism in Poland, and so had lived in Vienna for quite a number of years. These undocumented Polish Jews were a special target for Hitler's rage, and he was in danger in Vienna, unlike Martha. So he found himself sleeping on park benches, not being able to go to his apartment, trying to stay safe until his visa would be called. because the Nazis were searching for him, he was able to find passage on a ship of other refugees other Jewish refugees streaming towards America, who went to Havana, Cuba, as a safe place to wait for their turn to be admitted to America. However, when Leo's ship came into the Havana harbor, by the most unfortunate luck, the Cuban officials who had been bribed to allow these immigrants to come in decided to raise their extortionary demands and asked for more money. The Jewish organizations, mostly in America, who had paid these bribes, could not raise the amount of money that was demanded, and so Leo's ship was not permitted to land, and it was returned to the port from which it had departed in Europe, which was in France. Not so lucky were the people on the ship in the background of this picture. That is the SS St. Louis. It's a famous story and the subject of a movie called The Voyage of the Damned. That ship had departed from Germany and so was forced to return to Germany, where a number of its Jewish refugees were put in concentration camps and would perish. Leo, fortunately, was taken to France, and where he was where the French army arrested him, and he became forced labor for the French army as they prepared to fight off the threatening Germans. And his unit was his unit of Jewish prisoners went with the French army towards Dunkirk. And when Dunkirk fell, the French army, with all their Jewish prisoners, ran from the north of France, literally ran most of the way all the way south to Marseille. In Marseille, the army had disbanded and these prisoners were released. But by the time that Leo reached Marseille, his visa had expired. And he was forced, while his paperwork went through a big, long series of delays by an anti-Semitic State Department, and also a State Department worried about possible fifth column German refugees, immigrants coming into the country. His paperwork was delayed and delayed. Leo hid in haystacks because the French had begun threatening these Jewish immigrants. It was a Vichy puppet government under the influence and then certainly soon the control of Germany. Leo then hid in the Pyrenees. His efforts to escape to America lasted for 2 years. Next slide. This is a really historic document. You probably can't quite see the signature of Hiram Bingham. Some of you may have heard of Hiram Bingham, who was an American consul stationed in Marseille. He was allowing these Jewish refugees desperate to immigrate to America. He was allowing those with legal paperwork to have their paperwork signed, sealed, and approved. So many other efforts of Leo's to get his new paperwork approved had failed. But on the last day that Hiram Bingham was serving in Marseille, Leo's paperwork came to the top of his stack and he approved it. When the State Department realized how Hiram Bingham was approving all these refugees that the State Department was trying to prevent from coming into the country. They removed Hiram Bingham and sent him to South America, where he could not influence the stream of refugees any longer. Next slide, please. But Leo did escape. He was able to come to America. This is a picture of Martha, his wife. She had waited safely for several months after Alfred Berger's letter, waiting for her number to come up. And she, in the end of 1940, was able to sail on the last passenger ship, American passenger ship that sailed from France to America. She had arrived 2 years before her husband would arrive. She met ship after ship after ship, hoping that Leo was aboard. The mails were so poor that she never knew when he would come, and she would get a letter that was months old and said, I'm coming, and he'd name the ship, and then that would fall through, and she would wait in vain. But eventually they were reunited in America. Next picture, please. This is these are pictures of letters that Alfred and Hedwig wrote to their daughter in America. On the left, you can see the letter on the far left is one of their earlier letters where the handwriting is just neat and trim. The middle letter, you can see, is starting to be more blurred. Hedwig's writing is at the top, and even her usual handwriting has started to disintegrate. Alfred's handwriting is on the bottom of that middle one. It's blotched, it's hard to read. His handwriting, his eyes have deteriorated even more. And they were really overwhelmed with fear also as they saw their chances to immigrate slipping away. The letter on the right is actually a postcard, what passed as postcards at that time, that Leo wrote, that Alfred Berger wrote to Herman, his brother, who had escaped to America. In his letter to his brother, Alfred is able to say things that he wasn't able to say to his children, who he didn't want to worry them. Alfred and Hedwig wrote these fairly cheerful, ordinary letters. The letter he wrote to his brother has a shocking sentence. Hedwig has returned from Nordhausen. Hedwig had been sent as forced labor to Nordhausen. Luckily, sort of luckily, at a time when it was still just labor, not brutality. So she was surviving in a factory that packaged medicines. Alfred, meanwhile, because of his blindness, was able to petition. If you can imagine this cruel government, Alfred could petition them, and because of his disability, say that he had to have his wife back home. And so his disability pulled her out of Nordhausen. Had she remained only even a few months longer, it turned into a horrific death camp, where the death rate of the slave labor, Jewish slave labor, was just awful to even think about. Next slide, please. This is the last picture we have of Alfred here. This is a picture that his son-in-law drew from it's a painting that his son-in-law drew from that last picture we saw of them around the table. The picture that Leo drew of Hedwig actually came from this photograph, which is an earlier photograph where she still has that pleasant sort of inexplicable sort of expression of calm on her face. So these are the final pictures that we have of Alfred and Hedwig, who would each meet their separate end at the hands of the Nazis in 1942. Next, please. This is a picture of myself on the right, my husband Sidney, and Celia Sizes, Alfred and Hedwig's granddaughter, in Vienna, where we went together to explore the Berger's story. I went to archives all over Vienna. Celia went to a couple of those, but more she wanted to follow the footsteps of her family, her grandparents, through the city. So we went to, we're standing in front of the apartment where Celia's mother, Martha, lived and grew up, where Alfred and Hedwig lived for 30-something years before they were pushed out and their apartments confiscated by Aryans, quote Aryans. They were pushed out first from one apartment and then to another, when they finally ended up in a sort of a ghetto without walls in Vienna. Next picture. The two of Gretel Berger's grandchildren from Israel joined us in Vienna too. And here they are. There's Celia on the left, Micha and Judith, standing in the place where their mothers had stood those years ago, posing in that same place, thinking about their parents. The Israelis knew absolutely nothing of their grandparents. They said when they tried to ask their mother, she would only cry, and so they learned not to ask. Here they are reclaiming their grandparents' story, their own family Holocaust story. It had been Hitler's goal to eradicate Jews of Europe from memory. But this family was able to, there are so many Holocaust stories. Some have been saved, many have been lost still, and we hope that somehow stories will continue to be reclaimed. But this is a picture of the Berger family reclaiming their own family Holocaust story. Next, please. So I had started out my research with a few sort of really basic kinds of questions about the Bergers. When I finished my book, I found that it really was not a book of answers, but a book of more and different questions. I think deeper and more meaningful, with a lot of resonance for us today. I don't think the Holocaust has been called a wound that is never healed. And I think there are so many unanswered questions. There's so much left to think about. The Holocaust will never be understood. It's too big, too complicated, and too impossible to really conceive of. But some of the questions that came out of my book for me are one simple one. What would I have done if I'd have received Alfred Berger's letter? What would I have done if I'd lived in that time and received the letter? What would I have done if I had lived in Vienna, either as a Jewish person trying to flee or as a non-Jewish person? What would I do? Would I have gone along for my own personal safety with this horrific persecution? Or would I have risked myself and my family to protest? The last question is such a seemingly simple one. Can I change the world? um, the burghers in America who received that letter, they could have changed the world. They could have saved some lives if they had believed in their own power to change the world. So what I do hope for people to take away from this book is to understand how we all have power to make the world different. We don't have to go along with things are. We don't have all the power of a president, but we do have our own power, and together we can change the world. So with those questions, I'd like to stop talking and let people who might have their own questions ask anything that they would like to about the book or about the questions that the book raises.
Great. Thank you, Faris. So we do have a few questions in the chat, and I'll just start reading those for you. The first question comes from Sevia. How did the family feel about the writing and the publication of the unanswered letter?
The family was part of my journey from early on in this process. So they weren't surprised by the information that was in the book. They didn't actually have it all put together. They are so proud of this book. They've shared it. The family in Israel has I don't even know how many grandchildren and great grandchildren, but they have a very large family in Israel, and they've told the stories that are in this book. They've shared the book with all the family members. They want them to know. Celia Sizes has no children, but she was really the keystone to my starting to unlock this story. And she is so very grateful that the pieces that she knew were put together and she could understand a lot more about her own parents, Martha and Leo. They're all very grateful, and they have become my friends. We talk not all the time, but we're in frequent communication. The Israelis have come to visit me in Eugene. We've been to Israel to visit them, and Celia's health is frail, so she is not able to travel. But we have visited her also, Sydney and I both.
Thank you. Next question is from Emily. What would sponsoring this family have involved for an American?
Yes, it was a great big ask. It was not a small favor to ask, not a small request at all. It's actually not that different from today, what it would take to sponsor someone crossing the border to America. An American citizen has to vouch for, and it has to be a citizen, has to vouch for make a legal statement that they will be responsible for this immigrant coming into the country financially, so that this immigrant would not become a burden to the country, and in other ways too. They swear legally that they will be responsible, and they have to submit as part of their sponsorship their own financial statement. So it's a big ask. It's a big risk. Alfred and Hedwig, in fact, would not have become a burden. They spoke the truth that their daughter and son-in-law would have supported them, and that they were very willing to work themselves. But the burghers in America who received the letter, we don't know why, did not answer that letter. As much as we can learn, it looks very, very likely that they did not answer it. But I do have to say that they saved the letter through several moves and through several generations. The letter did move them, and I think it touched their heart but the times in late 1930s were still post-Depression era. The economy was bouncing up and down. Sometime even throughout the 30s, unemployment would reach 20%, if you can even imagine that. So they may not have answered it just because they themselves did not feel secure. They were kind of lower middle class family.
So we did have a question about if you contacted the family that the letter was sent to, and it sounds like you had some contact.
My husband's patient who brought him the letter, who had had it for years in her own home, told me that. So I learned that the Bergers who had received it had passed away, like in the early 1970s. But she knew them. She had talked with them. She found that they were not anti. So I did speak with her any number of times. My husband's patient, she has also passed away. She was elderly when I received the letter, and but I speak also to her daughter frequently, who says she's ashamed of her family for not responding to the letter. They were not anti-Semitic. They simply, who knows? No one can answer the question of why they did not respond to the letter.
Thank you. We had a question from Sabina. She would like to hear about your publishing journey. For the manuscript, did you find an agent that supported your project while you were working on it? And she also says congratulations on your publication, on the award. So a little bit about the story of how the book came to be.
Yes. So it took me a very long time to write the book, a decade for sure. Partly because I was used to writing newspaper-length stories, which had to be done on a deadline. And so I did not ever dig deeply into the stories I wrote for the Register Guard. They had to meet a deadline. And so when I began writing this, I had become restless about doing the newspaper work, and had been looking for something that I felt would be meaningful and would be worth my effort, my time, and my the whole path would be worthwhile. That whatever I would do would be meaningful, and it's kind of like a confluence, a perfect good storm of my being interested, kind of looking for something to write, and this letter coming into my life. So it took me a long time to research and write this letter, because doors opened sequentially to the information. For instance, the letters that were translated, I didn't discover till several years into the project, and I was really sitting down to write this book when Celia Sizes calls me up in the middle of the night saying, "Oh my God, you will not believe what I found! A suitcase in the back of a closet that held over 100 letters." So you all may know Hilda Geisen, have known her, who passed away a few years ago. She was a member of TBI, and she was a survivor of Theresienstadt. I interviewed her as part of my research, just to educate myself more about the Holocaust. And as I was leaving her house, I kind of said, "Well, I don't suppose you'd be interested in helping me to translate these letters." And before I even got the words out of my mouth, she said, "Yes, I'd love to do that." And so I went to her house every Wednesday for a long time, where she would sight read, sometimes needing a magnifying glass, this old German script. and I was sitting on her couch with my laptop, trying to keep up with her. She would explain things that were subtle in the letters. On a simple letter, there was a point where Hedwig's and Alfred are moved into a group apartment. And Hedwig says, well, at least Hansi came with us, and Hansi is singing. It's so wonderful to hear. So I'm going, oh, who is Hansi? That's a character I don't know. And Hilda says, oh, that's what all the Germans and Austrians would name their canaries. So that was one step in the writing. A lot of things happened like that sequentially, but towards the very beginning of my process, Judith Baskin and Stephen Ungerleider, whom I'm sure you may know, introduced me to a most amazing Holocaust scholar and one of the founding members of the U.S. Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C., Michael Berenbaum. So I took the letter to him. And Sabina, I'm getting there slowly to the heart of your question. I took the letter to him in the very beginning of this process of writing, telling him that I had gotten this letter, or how it came to me. And I said, I really am not sure what to do with it. I wanted to write about it, but I felt like I was not Jewish myself, and I felt like that was awkward for me to be writing this story about what happened to this Jewish family. And I knew so little about the Holocaust at that time. So I showed him this letter and just said, what do you make of this? Have you seen anything like this? And he said that he had seen some like this before. He encouraged me to go ahead and write it. He said, there are so many Holocaust stories written by Jewish people. It's a good thing for some people who are not Jewish to sort of act as stand-in characters, if you will, for people who don't know about the Holocaust and are trying to learn. And so he encouraged me to write the book, to investigate it and to write it. As I was leaving, he made this wonderful offer. He said, Anne, I said, I'm still worried about this. And I said, I don't know enough. He said, don't worry. He said, whenever you finish, send it to me and my group will look at it so you don't make any big mistakes. So this generous offer remained in my mind for a decade while I worked on this book. And so when I finished it, the book, and I finished the whole thing, I did not try to pitch it to an agent, or a publisher first. I wanted to first know that I had done something that was true, every single word in it true and correct, and that I hadn't left something important out. So I emailed Michael Berenbaum, who lives in Los Angeles, 10 years after I'd seen him, and said, hi, you won't remember me, but, and you mentioned that you might be willing to take a look at it. And really, within a half an hour, he had emailed me back and said, sure, send it to me. So he read it. I went down to Los Angeles and talked to him after he'd read it. He had a couple small things that he said I would want to change. Sometimes I called Germans Nazis when I should have just said the Germans invaded, not the Nazis invaded, to distinguish the party, the Nazi party, the Nazi affiliation from the nation of Germany. So that, and he had exact numbers just on the top of his mind of the exact damage during Kristallnacht. So he filled that in for me instantly. And then he said, "What else can I do for you?" So, yeah, I said, "Oh, I don't suppose you would know an agent who you could recommend?" And he said, "Sure, I'll send it to my agent." So that's Ronald Goldfarb, who lives in Washington D.C., sometimes also Florida, who had published a lot of Holocaust materials, a writer himself, and just a brilliant man. So Michael Berenbaum explained that his forwarding my manuscript to Goldfarb would not by any means guarantee that he would want it, but it would that Goldfarb would only accept this manuscript if he thought he could make money from it, because this was his business. Ronald Goldfarb read it in lightning speed, and he wanted it, so it found an agent right away. It did not find a publisher right away, actually. It went through a number of publishers till finally I asked my agent to please hold it back. I wanted to look at it again, and so I actually edited it quite a bit and smoothed out rough parts. I had been under the false impression that a publisher would possibly be interested in a book, even if it was sort of in rough form, and that they would do lots of editing and just whip it into shape. So that was wrong, at least in my case. So I took the manuscript back, and I smoothed out a lot of rough areas, and so he sent it out again, and it started to go through the same process. And I remember telling a friend, "Okay, it's just dead. I'm going to forget about it." That same day, two publishers, offered it for it. So it had sort of a unique path, based on people people I knew, and I think that has some impact on how to get published. I did not have to write that huge proposal that many people have to write to submit a book, even to an agent. So I had a very lucky path, thanks to members of TBI.
Wow, that is a great connection with the community, and I really appreciate your sharing that. What a great story. It looks like we do not have any more questions. We just have a lot of appreciation, and the chat will be saved. And so you and Cantor Evelyn are both welcome, and I encourage you to look at that chat sometime at your leisure. And so I think what we're going to do is conclude our program and thank everyone for attending. And we want to thank Cantor Evelyn again, and thank Faris for being with us, and thank all
And
of you.
I thank you all for coming and taking your time to do this. I'm so grateful.
Yes, thank you all. So I will just wish everyone a peaceful evening, and we hope to see you again soon. And I'm going to end the YouTube. If you two want to stay on for just a minute, that would be